A young nurse donated her blood to save the life of a little boy, unaware his dad is one of the richest men in the world. He changed her life. The morning at St. James Hospital in Texas felt ordinary, yet strange. Becky, a 24-year-old nurse, had just resumed her shift, unaware of what was to befall her. It was exactly 8 a.m. when she was attending to a patient when the ER doors burst open. Paramedics rushed in a 10-year-old boy, badly injured in a car accident. He was losing blood fast and needed an immediate transfusion of a rare blood type, O-negative. They needed it so badly that Becky, without a second thought, stepped forward and offered to donate her own. The whole room was left in shock by her selfless act of kindness. Only moments before, Becky had been gently adjusting in 4-line for an elderly patient, offering a reassuring smile and a soft word of comfort. The steady rhythm of heart monitors and the muffled conversations among staff had filled the air. It was the kind of morning Becky was used to, predictable, composed. But when the ER doors slammed open with urgency, the atmosphere instantly changed. The sound alone had a weight to it, the kind that told you something terrible had just happened. 2 paramedics, soaked in sweat and tension, wheeled in a small, limp body strapped to a gurney. The boy's clothes were torn, soaked with blood, and his face was pale, ghostly. The senior ER doctor, Dr. Marcus, rushed to the gurney, barking instructions to the staff even before the stretcher came to a full stop. 10-year-old male, severe blunt force trauma, likely internal bleeding, BP dropping fast. He's O-negative, and we have none in stock, one paramedic reported breathlessly. Code red, Dr. Marcus called. Page the blood bank. Get trauma room 3 prepped. We need O-negative stat. Panic began to spread through the team. Everyone knew that O-negative blood was not only rare but often in short supply. As the boy's heart rate began to falter, the room seemed to vibrate with urgency. Nurses scrambled to set up IVs. One resident attempted to locate veins that were collapsing faster than they could act. And then, without drama, without fanfare, Becky stepped forward. I'm O-negative, she said, her voice calm but resolute. Test me if you need, but take what you can. For a heartbeat, the room froze. Becky, the young nurse who had barely had a sip of coffee that morning, who was known for her gentle bedside manner but never placed at the center of chaos, was volunteering to give a piece of herself to save a boy she didn't even know. Dr. Marcus looked at her, then at the boy, and made a split-second decision. Get her typed and cross-matched now. Within minutes, Becky was in a chair in the adjacent room, a technician prepping her arm while others fought to keep the boy alive. Her blood began to flow into the collection bag, warm and red, a lifeline forming in silence. She didn't flinch. She didn't ask who the boy was. She only watched through the open door as the team worked furiously. What no one in that room yet knew was that this boy, this fragile, broken child clinging to life, was Ethan Rhodes, the only son of Alexander Rhodes, one of the richest men in the world. The Rhodes name sat atop skyscrapers in New York, foundations in Paris, and think tanks in Zurich. But in that moment, none of it mattered. Ethan had been on his way back from a school field trip, accompanied by a private driver and a security officer. The plan had been safe, routine, yet fate had its own ideas. A truck driver, distracted and speeding through a red light, had struck the vehicle head-on. The driver was knocked unconscious. The security officer injured. Ethan, unbuckled for just a moment to reach for a dropped toy, took the worst of the impact. Back in the ER, Becky's blood worked its way into the boy's veins. The heart monitor, which moments before had been dancing on the edge of silence, began to steady. His breathing became less ragged. A flicker of color returned to his cheeks. He's stabilizing, the trauma surgeon announced. Prep for or. We may have a shot. Relief swept the room like a wave, but no one relaxed, not yet. Becky sat quietly as a nurse covered the needle wound on her arm and handed her a juice box. Her hand trembled slightly, the weight of what had just happened beginning to settle in. The staff moved around her like a tide, some patting her shoulder, some simply nodding, their expressions a mixture of awe and gratitude. You didn't even ask who he was, one nurse said, half in disbelief. Does it matter? Becky replied softly. But it would matter. High above the Atlantic, on a private jet streaking through the sky, Alexander Rhodes was on his way home. He had left Geneva just hours earlier, following a summit on global climate investment. His assistant had broken flight protocol to bring him the call. Your son's been in an accident. It's serious. Alexander's world had tilted. His voice, always cool and commanding, cracked. Tell me everything. Every detail. When he heard his son needed blood, and that a stranger had stepped in before the doctors could even call, his breath caught. Find her, he said. Whoever she is, whatever it takes. Find her. He had wealth, power, global influence, but none of it had stopped his child from suffering. None of it could turn back time. And now, the only reason his son still breathed was because of a young woman he'd never met. Back in Texas, Ethan was taken into surgery. Becky wasn't allowed in the OR, but she waited. Hours passed. At one point, Dr. Marcus came out and gave her a brief smile. He's not out of the woods, but your blood made the difference. You gave us time. That night, Becky returned to her small apartment. Her clothes smelled of antiseptic. Her body ached. She didn't tell her roommate much, just that a boy had come in, and she had helped. She didn't sleep. Her mind replayed the day in loops. The colorless face, the blood, the moment the monitor began to beep steadily again. She had no idea that her name was already being spoken in hushed awe across boardrooms and hospital wings alike. That her photo, taken by a discreet hospital administrator, was already en route to Alexander Rhodes. She had no idea that tomorrow, her life would no longer be private. The morning sun had barely risen over Texas, casting a golden hue across the polished windows of St. James Hospital. The world outside was slowly waking up, joggers, delivery trucks, early buses. But inside, something else stirred. A quiet buzz of anticipation rippled through the hospital corridors, one far different from the usual morning bustle. Whispers floated between nurses at the break room coffee machine. A few doctors gathered near the nurses' station, unusually alert. Word had spread like wildfire. Alexander Rhodes was coming. But Becky had no idea. She was doing what she always did, tending to her patients with gentle hands and soft words. Her heart still carried the weight of yesterday. The image of the boy's pale face, the frantic shouts, the feeling of her own blood leaving her veins to save his life, it lingered. She hadn't told many people about what she'd done. She didn't see it as heroic. To her, it was simple. Someone needed help, and she could give it. As she adjusted in 4-line in room 203, the elevator near the ER chimed softly and opened. 2 tall security guards stepped out first, followed by a man in a dark tailored suit. One whose presence seemed to make time pause. Alexander Rhodes. He didn't look like the magazines. Not today. The power and poise were still there, but there was something else, rawness. His eyes were tired, swollen from sleepless hours and fear. But his stride was steady, purposeful. He didn't come as a CEO, or a billionaire, or a man with the world at his fingertips. He came as a father. Where is she? He asked, voice low but firm, as he approached Dr. Marcus at the nurse's station. She's finishing her morning rounds, the doctor replied with quiet reverence. She doesn't know you're here. Good, Alexander said. Let her finish. He waited in silence, standing still among the chaos of beeping monitors and hushed conversations. It was a strange image, the most powerful man in the state, just waiting. A few passing nurses stole glances. A resident nudged another. No one dared approach. And then, Becky turned the corner. She was holding a clipboard and adjusting her stethoscope. She looked up, caught the sight of the man standing near her station, and stopped in her tracks. For a brief second, neither of them moved. Becky blinked. Mr. Rhodes. He took one step forward. You're Becky Sullivan? Yes, she said slowly, still unsure. I'm Ethan's father. His voice faltered. And I came here to thank you. She glanced away shyly, overwhelmed. I didn't do anything special. You saved my son's life. She shook her head, eyes already welling with emotion. I was the only match. I didn't know who he was. I didn't know anything. I just did what any nurse would do. Alexander exhaled deeply, as if the truth of her words shook him more than any tragedy. No, he said. You did what a rare person would do. In a room full of chaos, you stepped forward. You didn't hesitate. You gave something no amount of money could buy. You gave him time. You gave me back my son. Becky was speechless. The hallway was still. No one dared move. Alexander reached into his coat and pulled out a thin envelope. This is yours, he said. Inside is a check. You can write the number. Anything you want. Her eyes widened. No, I can't accept that. He raised an eyebrow. Why not? Because I didn't do it for money. I didn't even think. I just saw a boy bleeding, dying, and I reacted. Please understand. I'm just a nurse. This is what we do." Her voice trembled on the last word. Not out of fear, but sincerity. It wasn't humility for show. It was truth. Alexander stared at her, then slowly lowered the envelope. "In all my years, I've never been more humbled," he said. "You reminded me of what real grace looks like." She nodded, brushing a tear from her cheek. "I'm glad he's okay. That's enough for me." "But it's not enough for me," he replied. "Please, let me do something. Let me thank you properly." Becky looked up. "If you want to thank me, make sure nurses like me have what they need. Supplies, training, support. There are Beckys in every hospital, and most of them are exhausted. That would be thanks enough." There it was again, that calm, resolute strength. Alexander saw it, and it moved him. He gently reached into his inside pocket once more, not with a check this time, but a folded letter. "Then let me offer this," he said, handing it to her. "A home. No strings attached. Fully yours. A quiet place. A safe place. A place to rest." She opened it slowly. Her hand flew to her mouth. The deed to a beautiful townhouse not far from the hospital. Fully paid. Fully hers. "Why?" she whispered. "Because I want Ethan to grow up knowing what true kindness looks like," he said, his voice breaking. "And because, no matter what I do with the rest of my life, I'll never be able to repay what you gave me in that moment." The night air was cool as Becky Sullivan stepped out of the cab and stood before the wrought iron gates of the Rhodes estate. A nurse by profession, and still in disbelief about the events of the past 48 hours, she clutched her coat tighter around her. The letter in her hand was brief and formal, yet the signature at the bottom carried a gravity she couldn't ignore. "Dinner. Tonight. My home. A token of appreciation awaits. Alexander Rhodes." It had only been a day since she stood in the ER of St. James Hospital in Texas and offered her blood to a boy she'd never met. A boy who was moments away from death. A boy whose rare blood type matched hers. She never expected what followed. That boy, Ethan, was the only son of Alexander Rhodes, media-shy billionaire, tech titan, and one of the wealthiest men in the world. Becky didn't know any of that when she stepped forward. She only saw a child in need. But the world had taken notice. And now she was walking through ornate gates and up a stone path lined with fire-lit torches, wondering what exactly lay ahead. The door opened before she reached it. Alexander stood there, taller than she remembered, dressed in an understated black suit with no tie. There was no entourage, no assistants or press, just a man, a father, whose life had changed too. "Becky," he greeted with a warm smile. "Thank you for coming." She nodded. "Thank you for inviting me." He gestured inside. "Please. I promise it's just dinner." The interior of the house was breathtaking, but not cold or extravagant. It was tastefully elegant, filled with soft lighting, art that whispered rather than screamed, and the faint aroma of rosemary and lemon. A private chef brought out a modest yet exquisite three-course meal. Conversation came easily. Alexander was thoughtful, surprisingly down-to-earth, and genuinely interested in her world. He asked about her family, how she became a nurse, what she loved about the job. She told him about her mother, who raised her, and her two brothers after their father passed, about her student loan debt, the double shifts she pulled to make ends meet, and how, even when exhausted, she found joy in helping people. It wasn't until dessert, honey-drizzled pear tart and espresso, that Alexander reached into his inner jacket pocket and placed a small white envelope in front of her. Becky looked at it, unsure. "What's this?" He held her gaze. "A thank you. From a father who was powerless in the moment his son needed saving. I couldn't do anything." "But you did." Becky hesitated. "Mr. Rhodes, Alexander," he said gently. "Alexander," she repeated. "I didn't do it expecting anything. He was a child. I didn't even know who he was." He nodded. "That's exactly why this means so much." She slowly opened the envelope. Inside, neatly folded, was a certified check. The number on it made her breath catch in her throat. $100,000. She blinked, stared, and blinked again. "This can't be real." "It is," he said. "No strings. No conditions. Use it however you see fit. You gave something invaluable to me. This is just a fraction of what I wish I could give back." Becky stared down at the check, hands trembling slightly. The thoughts that raced through her head were chaotic: relief, disbelief, gratitude, and a lingering fear of what came next. For years, she had counted every dollar. Skipped vacations. said no to dinner invites, lived paycheck to paycheck. And now this. This could change my life, she whispered. Alexander smiled. That's the idea. And it did. That night, Becky returned to her modest apartment and placed the check on her kitchen table. She sat staring at it for hours. Her phone buzzed with texts from coworkers who had heard rumors of the billionaire's gesture, but she ignored them all. In that quiet moment, she thought of her mother, long gone. She thought of the long nights in nursing school, of the days she skipped meals to make rent. She thought of every patient she'd held the hand of as they cried or took their final breath. She thought of Ethan's pale, fragile body and his pulse growing fainter by the second. She made a choice that night. The money would not be an escape. It would be a beginning. First, she paid off every cent of her student loans and then paid off her brother's tuition, too. She sent her aging aunt, who had helped raise her, on a cruise she dreamed of for years. She fixed her car's failing brakes. And with what remained, still a hefty sum, she opened a scholarship fund at the local community college for students pursuing nursing degrees. But Becky didn't stop there. With a small portion of the funds, she leased a long vacant storefront and turned it into a free weekend clinic, staffed by volunteers from the hospital, where she still worked full-time. Word spread quickly. Families without insurance, homeless veterans, single parents. They came not just for care, but for hope. And Becky was there, every Saturday, sleeves rolled up, smiling, listening. Alexander heard about the clinic through a discreet channel. He visited unannounced one morning. Becky was tending to a young girl with a sprained wrist when he walked in. Their eyes met, and he nodded silently in respect. After the clinic closed for the day, they sat on the steps outside. You really did this, he said. I had help, she replied, smiling softly. They talked for hours. It wasn't the last time. Over the following months, Alexander visited the clinic more often. Not with his usual security detail, not as the billionaire CEO, but as Ethan's father. Sometimes he brought books or supplies. Once, he brought Ethan, who hugged Becky tightly and never let go for almost a minute. You saved me, he whispered. Becky knelt down and said, You're saving me too. The bond that formed between them, Becky, Alexander, and Ethan, grew into something rooted in genuine affection. Not romance, not obligation, just something real, something healing. Alexander quietly increased the fund she had started. When she hesitated to accept, he told her plainly, What you're doing should exist everywhere. And I have the means to make that happen. Becky expanded the clinic's operations. Within 2 years, she opened a second location in another underserved part of Texas. She never quit nursing. She remained hands-on, grounding herself in the work that first defined her. At every ribbon cutting, she refused to stand on a pedestal. She let others speak, often watching from the back. But one day, a reporter finally cornered her. You were given a fortune. You could have retired. Why keep working? Becky looked into the camera, her voice steady. Because someone once gave me a gift. And I realized that money, by itself, doesn't fix things. But people do. Kindness does. Compassion does. This wasn't about me. It was about what could come from it. The sun rose gently over the east side of San Antonio, bathing the skyline in soft gold. It was an area once forgotten by city planners, where worn-out buildings and broken sidewalks had told stories of struggle for decades. But something had changed. A shining new structure stood at the heart of the neighborhood, not a high-rise or shopping center, but a place of healing and hope. The Sullivan Center for Hope and Healing. Its curved architecture, glass-paneled walls, and garden-lined walkways made it look more like a sanctuary than a hospital. And that's exactly what it was meant to be, a place not just for treating illness, but for restoring dignity. Becky Sullivan stood quietly in the courtyard, watching as a group of children played near the fountain. Some were patients, others were just from the neighborhood, but they all laughed the same way, with the unburdened joy of second chances. It had been 5 years since the morning that changed everything. 5 years since she'd walked into her shift at St. James Hospital, expecting another routine day. 5 years since a boy she didn't know, with a rare blood type and a shattered body, was rushed into the ER, and she, without hesitation, had offered her own blood to save him. At the time, she hadn't known who he was. Just a child. Pale, barely conscious, losing life with every minute. It was only later she learned that the boy's name was Leo, and that his father, Alexander Rhodes, was one of the wealthiest men in the world. She hadn't thought much of it. Her reward had been the boy's survival, his mother's memory honored, her duty fulfilled. But life has a way of surprising even the most selfless among us. When Alexander first invited her to his home, she thought it was a simple dinner of thanks. She remembered sitting across from him, a man used to command boardrooms and cities, now humbled by a nurse's simple compassion. He had handed her an envelope with a $100,000 check inside, calling it a token of appreciation. She had cried, overwhelmed. It was more money than she'd ever seen, but it was the next gift that shook her to her core. Months later, on the anniversary of Leo's recovery, Alexander met her again. This time, with something larger than any gesture she could have imagined, a $100 million endowment placed in her name. No strings, no conditions, just one request. Use this however your heart leads you. Becky hadn't been able to speak for several minutes. That night, she lay awake for hours, the weight of the world sitting beside her like an old friend. She had never wanted wealth. She had only wanted to heal. But maybe, just maybe, this was a way to do both. She didn't move to a mansion or flee to luxury. Instead, she stayed. She met with health experts, community leaders, struggling families. She asked questions. She listened. She remembered every patient who had waited too long for care, every child whose family couldn't afford treatment, every nurse who had worked through pain and exhaustion. And then she started building. The first hospital rose in East San Antonio, a place where mothers no longer had to choose between paying rent and taking a sick child to the doctor. The second opened in the Mississippi Delta, and the third in the desert outskirts of Arizona, where rural communities had been without consistent medical care for decades. Each hospital carried the same name, the Sullivan Center, not to honor her, she insisted, but to remind people of the humanity in medicine. The news caught on slowly. First local headlines, then national. Interviews flooded in, but she kept her answers brief. She was too busy working. She returned to nursing part-time, refusing to lead from afar. She wanted to be there, in the wards, washing hands beside other nurses, listening to patients' stories, handing out popsicles to children after blood draws. What truly mattered to her was that no one was forgotten, that no child died waiting for help. Becky's life had changed, yes, but her heart remained the same. The $100 million had become more than money. It had become schools for nurses in Haiti, mobile clinics in Appalachia, a pediatric research wing focused on rare diseases. Her legacy grew quietly, without fanfare, carried by gratitude and grace. But what people spoke of most wasn't the buildings or the budgets. It was her presence. One day, a janitor at the Arizona facility told a reporter, "She talks to everyone like we matter. Like she sees us." And she does. A young nurse in Mississippi said, "She makes us believe we can change the world." Because she already did. And Leo, now 15, often visited the hospitals with his father. Tall, curious, always smiling. He called Becky Aunt Becky and brought her drawings for her office wall. "I owe her my life," he once said during a quiet moment between patient visits. But more than that, she taught my dad how to live. Alexander, too, had changed. The man once surrounded by cold strategy and net worth now traveled with Becky to new ribbon cuttings. He became a donor in his own right, opening trust funds for disadvantaged families and funding emergency airlifts for children in remote areas. But he always credited her. "She didn't just save my son," he said during one public speech. "She saved me from a life of thinking money was the greatest power." At one point, Becky was offered awards. Humanitarian medals, leadership accolades, even an honorary doctorate. She accepted them politely but stayed humble. She never stopped seeing herself as a nurse, a healer. And she never forgot the day everything began. Years later, when asked how she wanted to be remembered, Becky responded, as someone who said yes when it mattered. That yes had rippled outward like stone on still water, touching lives far beyond her own, reaching people she would never meet. A single selfless act in an emergency room had become a global movement of compassion. Back in the courtyard of the San Antonio hospital, Becky watched as a child, no older than Leo had been that day, ran up and threw his arms around her waist. He had just completed chemotherapy. He was in remission. "Thank you," he whispered. She hugged him back, tears welling quietly in her eyes. "You're the brave one," she said. Behind her, on a stone wall near the hospital entrance, a quote had been carved in her handwriting. It read, "One act of kindness can become a lifetime of healing." If you enjoyed this story, Don't forget to like and subscribe for more inspiring stories like this one. We'd truly love to hear your thoughts in the comments. What did you think about Becky Sullivan's journey, from a humble nurse to someone who changed thousands of lives? How did you feel about Alexander Rhodes, the billionaire father who went from grief to gratitude and gave away $100 million in honor of one selfless act? And what about young Leo, the 10-year-old boy whose life brought them all together? How did his story touch you? Please rate the story on a scale of 1 to 10. Your feedback helps us bring more heartfelt stories to life. Also, let us know where you're watching from. Drop your city, state, or country in the comments. We'd love to see how far Becky's story has traveled. Thank you for being part of this beautiful reminder that even the smallest acts of kindness can create ripples that change the world.